Welcome, everyone. This is the first in a three-part webinar series on reading in mathematics. It's kind of a passion of mine to talk about this, and I will get into that in a little bit. There are other webinars that will be in this series, but the next set of webinars won't begin until March of 2025. So I'm glad you could join us for part one in this webinar series. I do have the chat open in front of me, and so if you have questions today, throw them in the chat. Thank you to Sandy and others who are putting links for others that are arriving into the chat. I would love for you to participate in the chat today. It makes me feel like I'm alive and that there's people there as we're going along. So put in what you ate for lunch today or something just to let me know that you're alive in the chat. And let's get started. My name is Sara Van Werf, and I am the MBE Academic Standards Math Specialist. And I am super excited to be with you for yet another webinar here at MDE. And I am going to talk today about things that are found that are going to be really useful with the Minnesota Math Standards. As many of you know, are the new standards, which are in rulemaking, the 2022 standards. They're not predicted to be used full implementation until the year 27, 28. So everything I'm talking about could be used right now with our current math standards, which our students will be assessed on over the next several years, as well as our future standards. I always want to center the work of anything that I'm doing on Minnesota students. These are students of our children of members of the math committee that wrote the standards. These children are now, I think, like 4 or 5, getting ready to go to kindergarten in a year or two. And so as we're thinking about our students, MDE has 10 commitments to equity. And the one that I'm using a lot in the webinar series I'm doing right now is what are the things that we can do to improve the conditions for learning for all K-12 math students in Minnesota. And what I'm going to talk about today is something you can use at any grade level, starting in kindergarten and moving up through calculus and beyond in high school. All the things that I will share with you today are on the same form. If you scroll down to page 2 of the page that you got that had the Zoom link that got you to this webinar, you will find a link to all the parts of the webinar series. Is where I will link the videos once they're up on the MCTM YouTube channel. And so there's a QR code there along with a bit.ly. I will again share this at the end, but if you click on the one, and I think somebody will put it in the chat again, the link for today's specific resources, you will find a document that has quite a bit of stuff specific to just this webinar. Lots of links for further learning. It also includes a template for using the routine that we're going to talk about in today's webinar. It also includes how you could use the recording of this video in a PLC if you wanted. Let's say your district wanted to provide reading relicensure hours. You could use this video along with the PLC protocol to do this with others in your sphere of influence as you're working, as well as a ton of resources as well. Thank you, Megan and others, for putting things into the chat. If you were at my webinar last week, you saw me sharing this GIF. This is how I think our students, not just some, but a lot, come into math every day. Please don't call on me and like trying to hide and like having to be dragged into math. And today we're going to be looking at that experience specific to reading. And so it's not just about word problems, but there is a hate. Like one thing that people can all get behind is a common hate of math word problems. There are all kinds of memes and GIFs out there related to them. And we know in the math classroom that dislike of engaging in reading in a math context, engaging in word problems. I remember when I was a K-12 student, the word problems were in the problem set and they were at the end, and it had this perception of this was a really hard part of the thing. And then our students go, they'll come up with all kinds of excuses to disengage from thinking around mathematics. And so as we're thinking about that work, what can we do to get past that? So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is to warm up your fingers. I'd love to see people put things in the chat. If you are watching the recording of this, I would love for you to look at this problem and pause the video and do some pre-work with the people that you're watching the video with and have a conversation about this next thing. Those of you here live, I would love to see all of you put something in the chat right now. Why do you think I grabbed a third grade question from the Minnesota question tool? This is a tool that has all sorts of MCA released items on them. I grabbed one problem. What are some of the reasons why you think students might struggle with this math task? So put as many as you can think of into the chat. I'd like all of you to put something there so that I just have a flurry of things in my chat that I'm looking at. Why might they struggle with this? So third grade assessment item. I'm going to pause and let you look at it. Again, if you're watching the recording, pause and talk to at least one other person about this question. Ooh, we have one of our assessment people here at MBE in the room, and he said they haven't read the problem. Need more information. Yeah, they don't realize that it says only Friday and Saturday. Why don't they realize it only says Friday and Saturday? What's behind that? They add up all the numbers without understanding. Why are they doing that? What's creating the experience that's creating these things? So you're talking about the things that they're doing. Oh yeah, even like how they think about addition. They're fragile in third grade with this. They're going to forget to think about place value when they're doing it. They miss the question. It starts with 3 days, but only wants 2 of them. The first sentence talks about driving for 3 days. They don't read all of it. Lots of great ideas in the chat. Well, we're going to take a look at this problem in a little bit, but first I'm going to give you a little bit of the research and things, and we'll come back to this problem in a little bit. One of the things that we know that we can do, and one of the reasons our students from the research we know don't engage in problems like that, is our students arrive to us with a mathematical identity where about 2/3 of our students really don't think of themselves as mathematicians. And so they just enter a lot of things not wanting to like really engage. And one of the most impactful changes I made in my personal career along with word problems is in order to promote mathematical reasoning, I started giving students the answers because the race to the answer was one of the things. I devalued this race to the answer. And instead I would give correct answers, especially in the first 2 months of school. And I would say to my students with word problems, hey, here are the answers, and I would love for you to give evidence for those solutions. And so if you think about the problem I just showed you, that would look like me circling letter C and saying, give the evidence why this is the correct solution. It did force them to go back and get past those things. That's not what I'm talking about today, but one of the things that we know can support students in doing this is devaluing answer getting and promoting reasoning. But today we're going to talk about an additional thing that can help us. So we're going to start with a favorite picture of mine that I use a lot. And I would love for you again in the chat or pause the video if you're watching it and talk to at least one other person. What's going on in this video? This is a picture of some students in the Osseo School District. I would love for you to put like 10 different things that you notice happening in this picture, because our goal is to create the conditions in our classrooms that allow us to have students who will engage in any math task, any math prompt that we put in front of them. So what are some of the things that you notice happening in this image? So in the chat, put little things. If you want to talk about her really cool pink and purple plaid pencil bag, you can talk about that. It can be about anything. What are things that you notice happening? Students are making drawings, they're discussing. Thank you. Collaboration, sharing thinking, lots of representations, active listening, models and drawing. Man, it's like I have prompted you to answer this question. Models and representations, math discourse, work, pictorial representations. If we take a look at this, it matches one of the things that's a core value of mine. I don't know if you know who Eli is, but Eli is the inventor of Desmos, and one of my claims to fame is in 2018. He quoted me at someone else's session and said, it's not a successful day in my classroom unless every single kid talks out loud about math. Literally every single one, every single day. And so this is my own set of students. And my goal is that all of my students are engaging in mathematical reasoning every single day. One piece of evidence of that is they're talking about mathematics, not necessarily to me, but to at least one other person in the math classroom. In order to do that, I, the teacher, have had to create a culture where they can engage in having conversations and talking out loud. One of the my favorite articles out there, it's an oldie but a goodie. I uploaded it into the folder that's linked in the document that I shared with you at the beginning of this session, is an article called Never Say Anything a Kid Can Say. And there's a lot of really great ideas in there to get students to be talking out loud, because what we know about good instruction in math is that the learning of math is social and students must engage in reasoning. So what does the current research say and how we develop that mathematical language? Well, one of the things, and this comes from the research out of the Stanford University, they studied language specifically in math, and they said that the development of language and the learning of math happens simultaneously. It happens at the same time. And they said that it's very, very important to address in the mathematics classroom, address with our students in developing their language in 6 modalities. And the picture that I shared with you before is really a picture of all 6 modalities. If you go back in the chat and look at what people said about this picture, people were talking about them reading and representing with representations and having a conversation and writing and listening and speaking. And so all of these modalities are there. My wondering is, what did the teacher do to create those conditions in this classroom? What are each of you doing in your classroom to create the conditions so that students are developing their reading skills in the context of math, developing their writing skills in the context of math? Well, today we're going to just talk about one of those 6 modalities, and that is reading. What can we do to support readers in a mathematical context so that they're just not like dragging themselves in? So let's think for the rest of this session how one might teach math and language, specifically reading, simultaneously. How can I do both and not send them off to a reading class to get that being their only place that they get reading instruction, but we can do that in the context of where they're going to do that. The good news is the people that did the research on this wrote up 8 specific routines that you can use to develop those 6 modalities of language. The one we're going to look at today is one that is called Math Language Routine number 6, 3 reads, and I'm going to introduce it to you, and then we're going to spend some time showing you how you could implement this into your classroom. By the way, all 8 of these math language routines are routines that have been over the last 5 or 10 years, new curriculums that have come out that have been being written into those curriculums. These are widely used. If you Google these things, you can find out information about them. This last June, we did a training with Graham, who's the multilingual learner lead in St. Cloud schools, around several of these math language routines. Hopefully we'll repeat that thing as well. One of the things we know, because this research comes out of the English language learner research in mathematics, in the classroom that I taught in Minneapolis public schools, I had a lot of students that had a label of English learner in them, but I also had a lot of students that had other labels, like special ed or student in poverty or homeless and highly mobile, or all kinds of other things. And then a whole lot of students who didn't have labels, some of whom probably had learning things. But here's what we know from the research on language. University of Stanford actually ended up taking this away from the English language learner, because what they realized was that these best practices for EL students were really best practice for all students developing their language modalities in mathematics. So let's take a look at what 3 reads is, and we're going to practice the 3 reads routine, and then I'm going to give you some example, give you just a smidge more research, and then give you a ton of routines to do this. One place you can read about this is in a book from Grace and Amy around called routines for reasoning. In there, they break down 3 reads. When you signed up for this webinar, I even gave you the page numbers where you could read specifically about this routine, because they have lots of other routines in this book if you want to do a deep dive into that. So we're going to practice this routine with just a random task. I'm using something from an open resource materials that anybody is free to take a look at. This is from an Algebra 1 task. I'd love for somebody in the chat to put what you think would happen to students if you said, hey, turn to page 17 and get started on activity 5.2. Put in the chat what you think would happen in your class if you said, open up your book, get started on activity 5.2. As you look at this task, you don't have to read it, just like take a look at it visually. What do you think students might do? Shut down, one person said. Go to the bathroom, ask to go to the bathroom. Yeah, we tend to come up with all these things, lots of chatter, no starting on the task. I always say the people who start on the task is whoever's standing closest to me or sitting closest to me will pretend like they're starting the task, and then some rule follow around the other side of the room. But that's what often our students will get off their phones, will do a bunch of other things whenever they're feeling like they can't do this. So this routine that I'm going to introduce to you to is what I bring to any task where I think my students might shut down. So if you're taking a look at this, students might look at this and they might be like, I can't do this. So let's think about what we could do instead to make this a better thing. So right now I'm going to treat you like students. I'm literally going to call on some of you to speak up and share some information with us. So I'd like you to put on your student cap. If you are watching the recording, I'd love for you, even if you're watching the recording alone, to speak out loud as I'm treating you like students for the next 5 minutes here. I'm going to model this routine for you and how to use the 3 reads mathematical routine with any task, especially if that task has text in that task. So let's get started. Hello, class. My name is Miss Van, and today we're going to do the 3 reads thing. I guess I wouldn't tell students this. Let me still talk to you like teachers. I forgot this slide was coming up next. Basically, here's what the 3 reads routine is. With this task, we're going to read it literally 3 times, and I'm going to ask a different question each time we read it. The first question I'm going to ask you is, what is this situation about? The second question I'm going to ask you as we read it a second time is, what can be counted or measured? The third question I'm going to ask is, how might we solve this? And again, we'll read the task 3 times before we do this. The first time we read it, we're really reading it to understand the story. The second time we read it, we're really reading it to think about the mathematics that is and the quantities that are in the problem. And the third time we read it, we're really supporting students and thinking about how they might start the problem. So we're not doing the problem for them. We're just having them brainstorm ways they might start along with their friends. The first time you use this routine, it generally will take about 5 minutes to 10 minutes with the class, but it gets faster and faster the more you use this routine with your students. All right, now I want you to be my students. Take a look at that task, because the task is going to look a little different once I show it to you. When I introduce this problem to my students, I do not say turn to page 17 and get started on task 5.2. Instead, I would introduce it to the whole class this way. Hello, class. We're going to get started together. I'm going to read this to you, and when I'm done reading this to you, I'm going to ask you to tell me, what is this situation about? I don't want you to think about the numbers in the problem or any of that stuff. We're not doing any math. I just want you to tell me, what is the story in this problem? Here we go. To get snacks for her class trip, Claire went to the bulk section of the grocery store, where she could buy any quantity of a product, and then the prices were usually good. Claire purchased some salted almonds at $6 a pound and some dried figs at $9 per pound, and she spent $75 before tax. Students, I'd love for you to either unmute or put in the chat, what is this situation about? What are some of the things that are going on in this problem? Again, I don't care about numbers or math. I just want to know the story of this task. So tell me what's going on. If you want to unmute, you can do it that way as well.
She is going shopping to buy snacks.
Awesome. So shopping is going on, and we are buying snacks.
$75 seems like a lot of money for snacks.
Lots of money just for snacks. I would agree. Yeah, and I see some people are talking about Claire is going to buy. So we have somebody named Claire, and she's going to buy almonds and figs. It looks like we're buying it for a class trip, so that's what we have going on. By the way, this is from another time that I did this problem. Sometimes I'll draw a picture. This is me talking to you like teachers right now of what's going on. But a lot of times what I'll also do is point at the picture if there is one and point at what the almonds are, what the figs are. I also saw in this problem, they might not know what a bulk section is. I noticed somebody in the chat like put quotes around the word bulk, and I don't think even all the adults in this space would know what a bulk section is. So sometimes I will pre-plan some just-in-time supports. I don't always use them with my students because they might already feel okay, but man, it literally takes just 30 seconds to Google pictures of things that students might need, to right-click, copy, and paste them into what I'm presenting to students. I don't always give them right away in that first read, but I have them there just in case because it's really easy to explain what's going on. Also, not all students have ever tasted a fig, know what a fig looks like. They might not even know what almonds look like. And so I wanted to make sure that this was going on. This task comes from a free math curriculum that you can find online. It's an open resource curriculum, and in the teacher notes, it talks about this routine. You can see at the top there, it talks about math language routine 6, 3 reads, and it tells you how to use this routine. And it even tells you in the first read what students might say. Claire purchased some snacks, salted almonds, and dried figs. That's pretty much all you have to get out in the first read. Students might say other things like, wow, that's a lot of money for snacks. But for the most part, we're just trying to get out the basic story. Notice there's no math there. We're not getting to the numbers. We're just doing that in the first read. All right, that's the first read. Now let me do the second read with you. I'm going to go back to treating you like students. All right, students, let's read this a second time. This time I'm going to ask Megan to read this out loud to us. After Megan has read this to us, we're going to answer this question the second time. What in what we're reading can be either counted or measured? I don't really care about the numbers. I just want to know what are the things, the items that can be either counted or measured. Megan, would you unmute and read this a second time for us?
To get snacks for a class trip, Claire went to the bulk section of the grocery store where she could buy any quantity of a product and the prices are usually good. Claire purchased some salted almonds at $6 a pound and some dried figs at $9 per pound. She spent $75 before tax.
Thank you, Megan. So to everybody else, Megan can take a break. What is something that could be counted or measured? You can throw this into the chat and or you can unmute. What's something in this story we could count? Yeah, there's going to be some kind of money that we could count. Yeah, we could look at pounds of figs. It's another thing I'm seeing in the chat. The cost of the almonds. I'm seeing people talk about total cost. We have pounds of figs and almonds. I've noticed somebody else saying. And we're thinking about cost in dollars, and we're weighing things in pounds. Great. That's our second read. Again, I'm speaking to you as teachers. You can see those words showing up in there. Again, we're not really worried about the numbers when we're doing this. And if you look at what was in the teacher materials for this, it's at the cost per pound of each snack food, the amount. One of the things we do want to do is attend to precision and not get them to say just pounds, but get them to say phrases like pounds of almonds, pounds of figs, or pounds of each type of food, and get them also to use, I didn't do this with you guys, but thinking about the rate language there, cost per pound as well. And notice it says without focusing on the numerical values of that. All right, we're going to do the third read. This time in a moment, Jane's going to read it to us for the third and the last time. Jane, just to give you a heads up, be careful as you're reading. You'll see what I mean by that in a little bit. It's nothing too scary. And class, when Jane is done reading this, I'm going to ask you, how might we solve this? And I don't want you to solve it. I just want you to talk about how we might start this problem. Jane, would you mind unmuting and reading this to us?
Sure. To get snacks for a class trip, Claire went to the bulk section of the grocery store where she could buy any quantity of a product, and the prices are usually good. Claire purchased some salted almonds at $6 a pound and some dried figs at $9 per pound. She spent $75 before tax.
Jane.
If she bought 2 pounds of almonds, how many pounds of figs did she buy?
So one of the things you might have noticed in the third read, we bring the question in. So in the first two reads, the question isn't there. In the third read, we bring the question in. All right, class, how might we solve this? What's something we might do first? I'd love either in the chat or someone on mute. What's something we might do? So someone in the chat says, find the cost of 2 pounds of almonds. So in the question, it talks about 2 pounds of almonds. So as I'm thinking about almonds, I might think about combining some of that information together. Yeah. Anything else you might do to start with? And then I can spend a little time, but I might just end it there and say to students, yeah, subtract from the total price. I might give them some basic ideas. At that point, I'm going to get them started on the whole task. What the 3 reads routine is set up to do is to engage students in the structure of the problem, to engage in reasoning before they jump to racing and finding answers, to stop them just a little bit to look at what's going on. If you take a look at this task is connected to the 9th grade benchmark 9.3.7.1. This is in the new standards, by the way. I can tell because at the end of the benchmark, there's little symbols as well, but it's also connected to our current standards. You can notice that we bring the rest of the questions in, but we're giving them just enough support so that they can engage in thinking about the task. So here is the whole routine. I made little things that I can put in the chat for you related to this. I found some emojis and threw them in. The whole routine works this way, just to repeat. In the first read, you're going to ask your students, and this goes pretty quick because I'm not stopping and showing you what's in the teacher textbook every time with students. First read, we read it out loud. I often as a teacher will read it the first time, but it could be a student. What is the situation about? In the second read, I often have a student read it the second time. Sometimes I ask for volunteers. Sometimes I call on people. The second question that the class will answer is about quantities. What can be either counted or measured? Then I'm going to reveal the question before the third read. And in the third read, I'm either going to have them read it to themselves or have another read it out loud and talk about how might we solve this? How might we get started? That's the 30 reads routine. And as we do this routine, the first time it's kind of choppy with students. But as you do this 4 or 5 times on different days with different tasks, students get better at just learning to read for meaning and making meaning out of what the problem is. I'll give you another example really quick from 2nd grade. We're not going to do it. Here's a 2nd grade task. I connected it to benchmark 2.2.36. If you take a look at this, another tweak that I sometimes do is I turn it into a numberless word problem. And I not only get rid of the question, I also get rid of the numbers temporarily. And we would read out loud, Jada read some amount of pages, fewer pages than Noah. Noah read some amount of pages. And then we'll answer the question, what is the situation about? Sometimes they'll support it with a picture to support this idea of what's going on. We'll read it out loud again. This time we'll talk about what could be counted or measured. We could count the number of pages. We can count the number of students. We could count how many books we're reading. Students will say it a lot. I will reveal the question and then we'll read it a third time and talk about how we might start the problem and how we might solve it. I often will reveal the numbers in that third read. Sometimes I keep them there for the first read. It just kind of depends. There's a lot of things that you can do to adapt and mix up this routine, but the basic idea of the questions stay the same. Here's an 8th grade example. One of the tweaks that I often do to make it easier to read is I'll take whatever in the student text and I'll put some space between each sentence. I'll start each sentence on a new line. Makes it a little bit easier for them as they're reading it and doing this thing to have some white space to make sense on what they're reading. I have found that to be really successful at doing that. And just like I did when I was modeling it for you, I'm often annotating what they're reading. I'll often highlight, I'll record the things that they're saying, and I often will have pictures that I'll use if students are struggling with what's going on. Like this problem here is about the ratios of length to width and phones and diagonals and all that stuff. So by the way, again, the pictures that I find take me less than 30 seconds to find. If you're a good Googler and you know how to click on Google Images, you can right click, copy, and paste. Some people with this routine have a template where they have students record. They give the task on the template and students take those 3 questions. And as a class, they work together to answer that. They sometimes will put that as part of a homework set where students will be in the habit of answering those questions before they jump in to the task. And then as you're thinking about this, you might be like, well, when and how do I use this? Well, you literally can use it with anything that has text. And so these 3 questions can go with anything. You always want to start with a Minnesota standard or benchmark as you're doing it. It can be a task from whatever curricular resource that you're using. If you wanted to start using this tomorrow and you didn't have anything with text in your current resource, you could go to the Minnesota question tool. I have that linked on the page that has a bunch of links, or you could use any open resource math text. The one that I'm using is Illustrative Math because they have something for kindergarten through high school at every grade level, and they actually have tons of stuff that you can use. And so it's just something free that I often use. So I started at the beginning of this webinar asking you why students might struggle with this. So let's think about this problem and how you might use this with a 3 reads. How might you adapt something from the Minnesota question tool in order to start to train students before they take assessments someday, either your classroom summative assessments or your exit tickets or someday the MCAs? How would you take the students? And I'm going to go backwards and talk about there's a lot of reading routines out there, but a lot of them have been dismantled. So we always start with a Minnesota standard or benchmark. So check, this is related to one of the standards and benchmarks. There's a lot of other routines out there that I see people have posters of in their classroom. And I wanted to just name some of them. I'm not trying to vilify these, but there's a lot of research to say these things don't work. So I'm going to give an example of one that I see a lot. It's called cubes. And one of the things that cube says is circle the numbers in units. We certainly could do that in this problem. There's that blue C. I've circled the numbers in units in the problem. And then it says underline the question. So we underline the question. And then B is box the clue words. Often when it's clue words, they're saying, am I going to add, subtract, multiply, divide, or percentage? And they're usually talking about math keywords. If you take a look at this problem, none of those keywords are in this problem. And students are left wondering, like, what do? I don't even know what to do with that little box and where to put that in the clue words. In fact, people who write assessments know about those keywords, and so they don't write assessments with those keywords in them. Often words like that focus students not on just a procedure to the problem, and students aren't making meaning and thinking about the context and the story. And so we want to look for things that promote. I don't know if you guys know who Van der Waal is, but Van der Waal is a math researcher from way back in the day. He's written a lot over the last 30 years. And one of the things he said is that keyword approaches encourage students to ignore the meaning and structure of the problem and look for the easy way out. Math is about reasoning and sense making. That's what my webinar last week about the first math practice is about. Of sense making strategy will always work. And the 3 reads mathematical routine came out of that research of sense making and developing reading around that. So I often will combine this with another math routine called numberless word problems. I link to that if you've never heard that, where I will take that task from the Minnesota question tool and I'll cover up some information in that task. Sometimes I'll keep the numbers, sometimes I won't. Sometimes I'll give the 4 answer choices, sometimes I won't. But the question I'll always leave until the 3rd read. And so just one last reminder in this 3 reads, it's really helping students make sense of the structure in 3 specific ideas: the context, the story, the quantities, and supporting them in making predictions about what could come next. You always want to start with the gold standard of starting with the standard or the benchmark, and then you want them to leave this routine with an idea of how to get started on the task. So just as a reminder, context, this is how we help them make sense of the structure and make reason out what the story is, the event, the statement, the idea. The second thing are the quantities. Those are anything that you can count, anything that you can measure. And by the way, sometimes those things are hidden in the words and they're not just the numbers. And so a lot of times students miss it if they're not reading the words. And then the third thing is the prediction, making an educated guess based on their observations about what's going to happen. So here's a template that you could use. I've included this. I've made it a separate document. I've also included it in the list of things that you could do. And each of those 3 boxes are about those 3 parts and the 3 reads in the problem. So let's take how it starts. It always starts with a standard and a benchmark. Then you're going to find some kind of task, but you're going to get rid of the question. So there's the question. I got rid of it. And in green, it just says Lynn's family drove for 3 days, 253 miles on Friday, 337 miles on Saturday, 152 miles on Sunday. When the question is not there, students don't have this like heart pounding, like, I don't know what to do to solve it. They're just engaging and looking at the structure. And then we're going to ask them, what's the situation about? And we're going to record what they say. And then we're going to ask them about what can be counted or measured. And we're going to record what they say. And we're going to ask them after we read it the 3rd time, what are possible math questions? By the way, that's, you could say, how might you solve it? But you also could make them guess what the question might be. In this case, students might say, what's a total miles driven? I think that's what we're going to have to do. Guessing the question feels good to them. When we reveal the question, how many miles did she drive on Friday and Saturday? Students will be like, oh, it's not all 3 days, it's only 2 days. And we support them in becoming better readers. And they think about just the 2 days from up above as they think about their answer. So there's the extended version if you want to take a look at it. I've included other people's version of the 3 routines. This is I uploaded this document from TNTP, who has written extensively about the 3 reads. LA Unified School District even has, for 3 reads, little graphics explaining the routine and how you might use that. All of this stuff is found in the session 1 Google folder, where I've included all kinds of these things. And in there is that document. I'm hoping somebody can throw that into the chat for me one more time, that has a professional learning protocol of how you could use the recording of this webinar when I get it up on YouTube. You also see that there is a template that you could use to do this, and then a ton of links that have tasks. I literally made for this, and I'll stick around for questions, but for every grade level, kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, I found a task and gave an example of something that you could use these for. The task came from either open resource materials or from the Minnesota question tool. And if you look in the comments of the tasks, I also included where I found it and how you could read more about it and learn more about that as you are going. So that is my webinar for you. I'm glad that you guys